Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome United States Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz.
Sun coming up over New York City.
God bless the RJC. Good morning. What a blessing to be with so many incredible friends, so many incredible warriors. Let's start with some good news. Nancy Pelosi is out of a job. That's a big deal. That is cause for celebration. But at the same time, what I want to do today is I want to ask a question that I know is on the mind of every person here. How do we win? The stakes are too high. The damage being done in Washington is catastrophic. How do we win? That's a big part of it, yes. I'm going to lay out 4 things. Think, fight, persuade, and mobilize. Let's start with think. Listen, understanding the battles we're facing is important. Merrick Garland, calling the FBI. IBM, Big Blue, they have a one-word motto. Think. Think. Somewhere, some poor audio tech is having a heart attack right now. We need to understand the battles we're facing. When I first arrived in the Senate 10 years ago, I set a goal to be the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate. That's a goal I've worked every single day to achieve. Now, all of us here celebrate the incredible, the historic achievements for peace that came in the Abraham Accords. We need to stop and ask ourselves why. Why did those come? And there's a difference in strategy. For a long time in Washington, all of the Democrats and most of the Republicans believed in strategic ambiguity. That you're like, oh, I'm a little for the Israelis, I'm a little for the Palestinians, I'm a little this, I'm a little that, they're all got problems. And all of the enlightened beards of foreign policy said that's how you keep peace in the Middle East. It's an absolute disaster. It is wrong. You want to know how you keep peace in the Middle East? You draw a line in the sand and you absolutely and unequivocally say the United States stands with Israel. Two decisions led to the Abraham Accord. Number one, under President Trump, moving our embassy to Jerusalem. That battle. The State Department and the Defense Department in the Trump administration both argued against moving the embassy. All right, I'll try that. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the audio tech. Who knew Matt was so versatile? That was a battle within the Trump administration. Both the State Department and the Defense Department fought against moving the embassy. I went straight to the president, made the case vigorously, and President Trump had the courage to overrule his own Secretary of State, his own Secretary of Defense, and move the embassy. And the day we opened the embassy, I was there in Jerusalem on the anniversary, the 70th anniversary of the creation of the modern state of Israel. The second decision, just like that, was pulling out of the Iran deal. Exact same fight. State argued against it. Defense argued against it. I went repeatedly to the president. Again, the president had the courage to overrule his own State Department, his own Defense Department, pull out of that deal. Why does that matter? The day the Abraham Accords were signed, when I was signed, I was at the White House. I was talking with the foreign minister and the ambassador of Bahrain and the UAE. They both said almost exactly the same thing. They said, we want to be friends with America. It is now clear that America stands unequivocally with Israel. Therefore, we will stand with Israel. That's how clarity works, but you got to understand what you're doing. What has Joe Biden done? He's gone back right to the same ambiguity, undermining our Israelis, which moves us backwards, which is why within months of his becoming president, thousands upon thousands of rockets began raining down on Israel. Or let's take another example, Ukraine. Why did the war in Ukraine happen? Didn't have to happen. It's a completely unnecessary war. It happened because of two specific mistakes Joe Biden made. Number one, the disastrous surrender to the Taliban that made every enemy of America look to the Oval Office and say our commander-in-chief is weak. I said at the time, the chances of Russia invading Ukraine has just increased tenfold. And the chances of China invading Taiwan has also increased tenfold. But then secondly, a very specific mistake that Biden made on Ukraine. Look, Putin didn't wake up yesterday and decide he wanted to invade Ukraine. He's wanted to for decades. He desires to reassemble what he sees as the former glories of the Soviet Union. He did, in fact, invade Ukraine previously in 2014. He invaded Crimea. But he stopped. Why did he stop? He stopped because Russia's major source of revenue is oil and that natural gas goes on pipelines right through Ukraine. And if he invaded it, he risked damaging or destroying those pipelines and eliminating their ability to get revenue. So what did he do the next year? 2015, Putin began a project called Nord Stream 2, an undersea pipeline that goes straight from Russia to Germany. It circumvents Ukraine. The entire purpose of Nord Stream 2 is when it's complete, it lets him get his gas to Europe without having to worry about Ukraine, which meant he could invade Ukraine. Now, everyone in Washington knew this was a terrible idea, but they all wrung their hands and said there's nothing we can do about it. I didn't believe that, so I drafted legislation in 2019, targeted sanctions that would bankrupt any company helping build Nord Stream 2. In December of 2019, I brought together Republicans and Democrats. I got the support of the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the support of the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the support of the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, the support of Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. And then I did the same thing in the House with the same 8 players there. All 16 came together behind my legislation. It passed Congress. And Putin stopped building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline the day President Trump signed my sanctions legislation into law. Pipeline was dead. Was dead for over a year, lay as a hunk of metal on the bottom of the ocean. Then Joe Biden becomes president. Biden became president on January 20th, 2021. Putin resumed deep-sea construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline on January 24th, 2021, 4 days later. The reason is Biden signaled weakness that he intended to waive the sanctions. It was absolutely catastrophically stupid. In the spring of last year, he in fact did waive the sanctions. And so Putin completed the pipeline. I responded by putting a hold on every single State Department nominee. And they lost their minds. Democrats began screaming at me. Reporters began screaming at me. Wobbly Republicans began screaming at me. They planted an article in one paper that says, right now, mansions in the capitals of Europe are laying empty without American ambassadors. Apparently, they haven't met a lot of Texans. If they thought that we would be weeping that rich Democrat donors were not currently throwing wine and cheese parties in glamorous mansions. But in December of last year, they were desperate to get their nominees through, and so I said to Schumer, fine, I'll cut a deal. I'll lift the hold on, ended up being 32 of these nominees in exchange for a vote on the floor on reinstating the sanctions on Nord Stream 2. Schumer gave in and agreed. I cleared 32 of the nominees. In January of this year, we had that vote. Every single Democrat had voted not once but twice in favor of my sanctions legislation that had stopped the pipeline. The day of the vote, President Zelensky publicly called on the Senate, pass Cruz's sanctions legislation. It is the only thing that will stop Putin from invading Ukraine. The day of the vote, the government of Poland publicly called on the Senate, pass Cruz's sanctions legislation. It's the only thing that will stop the invasion. I stood on the Senate floor and said, if you don't pass this, we will see tanks in the streets of Kiev. That day, Joe Biden came to Capitol Hill. It's the only time I know of where he's done this. He came to Capitol Hill to personally lobby the Democratic senators, and 44 Democrats flipped their vote and voted against sanctions on Putin, against sanctions on Russia, voted as a political favor to the Biden White House, and just a couple of weeks later, the tanks rolled into Ukraine. We need to be smart and think about why these fights happen. But number two, we need to fight. Look, if you want to win, Republicans need to stand and fight. We got to stand for something. Don't roll over at everything. As you know, this past week, we had a leadership battle in the United States Senate. First time it's happened in 16 years of Mitch McConnell being leader. I stood up and made a motion to delay the election until after December 6th, after the Georgia runoff, because Herschel Walker, I think, deserved a say in our leadership. But the even bigger reason is we need a real debate about how are we going to lead during the next 2 years with a minority in the Senate. And the question that I posed Mitch McConnell and our leadership was very simple. Is there anything on which we are willing to fight? I stood in front of the conference and I said, listen, I've traveled all over the country. I'll tell you, people are dispirited and demoralized because they say Republicans in the Senate don't fight, and there's a reason for that, which is that Republicans in the Senate don't fight. And I said, look, I'm not saying fight on everything. If you fight on 1,000 things, you're not fighting on anything. I'm saying pick 2 or 3 or 4 things that matter and say we believe in it. You look at the last 2 years. The Senate has passed over and over again bills supported by every Democrat, 100% of the Democrats, and 10 to 12 Republicans. By the way, the Ds never do that. When we had the majority, there are no bills passed with all the Republicans and 10 or 12 Democrats. They actually believe in the crazy stuff they say, and they're willing to stand up and fight on it. And so I asked our leadership, I said, is there anything? How about the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that Joe Biden is right now firing because they chose not to get a COVID vaccine? How about we say we're going to stand up and fight for those American heroes and not throw them out of the military? And to stand and fight means using the levers you have to force that fight. Or how about next year, we stand together and fight and say, under no circumstances are we going to fund the 87,000 new IRS agents to harass the American people. And we're going to take that money and we're going to put it on our southern border. We need to fight. Look, why did the Democrats do better than expected? A big part of the reason is they went hard left, they energized their base, they governed as left-wing lunatics, and their voters rewarded them by showing up in big numbers. We need to behave like we believe what we're saying, and that means having the guts to stand and fight. Third thing we need to do, persuade. We spend far too much time preaching to the choir, talking to the same 2.6 million people watching Fox News every day. The choir needs love, but we need to talk to young people and Hispanics and African Americans and suburban moms. Some of y'all may have seen a few weeks ago I went on The View. They kind of lost their minds. But look, there's value to that because all of the moms at home that watch that show are listening every day to left-wing propaganda. And there's power to being a happy warrior. There's power to being there, not mean, but just smiling and happy and bringing truth. And we've got to do it in a way that goes around the corrupt corporate media. Three years ago, I launched a podcast. It's called Verdict with Ted Cruz. We do it 3 days a week. It became the #1 ranked podcast in the world. We've had over 50 million downloads. Every week, we beat CNN, their morning show. I want to ask everyone here to do something. I want to ask you to pull out your cell phone right now. Pull out your cell phone. Well, for those of you who can. For those of you who can, pull out your cell phone. Pull out your cell phone and text the word verdict to 24005. Let me give you that number again. It's 24005. Text the word verdict. What you'll get back is a link to subscribe for free. I was saying this once, and my dad said, look, if you say subscribe, people in my age think it's like a magazine subscription. We're going to charge you. No, it's free. Subscribe is free. And you will get the podcast because what it's designed to do is give you the tools, the information to persuade your friends and colleagues and neighbors. Each of you has more influence in your own sphere of influence than anyone else possibly can. And the podcast is designed to go around the media to equip you directly. Fourth and final thing we need to do is mobilize. We need to mobilize people to stand up and fight. We need to empower them to stand up and fight. You know, when Barack Obama was president, I led the fight against the Iran deal then. We had a giant rally on Capitol Hill. Thousands of people came out, and I invited Donald Trump to come to that rally. Now, at the time, Trump and I were running against each other. And I remember he looked at me, he said, Ted, why would you invite me to come to your rally? And I said, well, because when you come, you bring about 200 TV cameras. And the whole point is to get the message out to the people. Look, we need to mobilize. I spent this election cycle about 2 months in a nationwide 17-state national bus tour, doing over 35 events for candidates for the House and candidates for the Senate. And we won some big victories. Without those victories, 11 challengers that I supported in the House won either open seats or beat Democrats. That's why Nancy Pelosi's out of a job. I raised and spent over $10 million last cycle supporting those candidates all over the country. But here's where also mobilizing takes resources. This cycle, I'm on the ballot in Texas for re-election in the Senate. When I ran 6 years ago in 2018, it was the most expensive U.S. Senate race in history. Over $120 million of hard money was spent in that race, and I was outraised and outspent 3-1. To give you an idea of what that means, in Q3 of 2018, I set a record for fundraising in a Senate race in Texas, raised $12 million in that quarter. The old record was like $7 or $8 million. I felt pretty good about my record. The record stood for precisely 2 hours. until my Democrat opponent announced his fundraising. Mine was 12 million, a record. What do you think his was? 38 million. More than 3 times as much. What does that mean? It meant my campaign had 19 paid campaign staffers. His campaign had 807. That's the differential. I can tell you right now, out of 100 U.S. senators, there is no senator the Democrats want to beat more than yours truly. There is no senator the people who hate Israel want to beat more than yours truly. And so we're going to see over $100 million spent on us in this cycle. I want to ask everyone here, I need your help. I want to ask you, many of you have supported me in the past. I want to ask you, go to the website. It's tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. One lesson I need to learn from Lindsey Graham is to say that a heck of a lot more. Hi, how are you doing? My name is tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. It's very good to see you. What lovely shoes you're wearing, tedcruz.org. But everyone here had the means and ability to come, and every one of you can go to tedcruz.org, make a contribution. Maybe it's 50, maybe it's 100, maybe it's 1,000, maybe you max out. But I can tell you, this is a fight worth fighting. This is a country worth saving. You believe that, I believe that, and this is the fight of our lifetimes. So I close as I open by saying to the men and women here who are warriors, warriors for freedom, thank you for the victory on Election Day of the House of Representatives, and let's finish the job and retake the Senate and retake the White House and retake the country, because that's what the stakes are. Thank you. God bless you.